Story number 1. The wrong reflection. I should have never looked in that mirror. The night shift at the gas station had always been quiet. Almost too quiet. The snowstorm outside had thickened, making the world beyond the gas pumps a swirling void of white. It was just me, the humming of the fluorescent lights, and the occasional static from the old radio behind the counter. But that night, something felt off. It started with the restroom door. It was supposed to be locked after midnight. Company policy. But as I stepped out for my break, I noticed it was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through. The security cameras hadn't shown anyone entering, and yet, when I nudged the door open, the mirror above the sink was fogged up, as if someone had just been standing there, breathing heavily. I frowned, wiping at the glass with my sleeve. The reflection that stared back was mine, or so I thought. Same tired eyes, same crooked nose. But something wasn't right. I couldn't place it at first. Then it hit me. I wasn't moving. I lifted my hand. My reflection didn't. My breath caught in my throat as I tilted my head, testing it again. Nothing. The figure in the mirror just stared, eyes wide, mouth closed. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My first instinct was to turn around, to see if someone was behind me. There was no one. I took a step back. The reflection did not. And then, slowly, so slowly, it smiled. Not a normal smile, but a stretched, too wide grin as if my face had been pulled at the corners. My stomach twisted. The lights flickered above me, the air turning unbearably cold. I wanted to run, to get out of that restroom, but my legs felt bolted to the floor. Then, my reflection raised its hand. I hadn't moved. The fingers tapped against the glass, slow, deliberate. A sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed in the tiny space. My reflection wasn't mimicking me anymore. It was watching, studying. Then, in a voice that sounded like me, but wrong, it whispered, "You shouldn't have looked." My body finally listened, and I stumbled backward, slamming into the door. My hands fumbled for the knob, wrenching it open as I practically threw myself out into the store. My lungs were heaving, my vision swimming. The gas station looked the same, bright, sterile, humming, with that same irritating overhead light. But everything felt different. I turned back toward the restroom. The mirror was now clear, and the reflection? It was normal. It was just me. My rational brain told me I was exhausted. Hallucinating, maybe. The isolation of working graveyard shifts in a near-empty gas station can do things to your mind. I forced myself back behind the counter, trying to shake the unease slithering down my spine. I needed to distract myself. I checked the security cameras, rewinding the footage to see if anyone had entered the restroom before me. But the screen showed nothing, no movement, except a shadow. It flickered just outside the restroom door, lingering there before I even walked in. But there was no figure, no body, just a shifting, unnatural shadow. And then it moved inside. The door chimed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. A man in a heavy winter coat trudged in, his boots slamming wet prints onto the tile floor. I tried to steady my breathing as he walked up to the counter. "Pump 6, he muttered, tossing a few crumpled bills down. I nodded, forcing myself to focus. My hands were still shaking as I entered the payment, but when I glanced up at him, my stomach dropped. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, directly at the restroom door. "You should get rid of that mirror," he said, his voice low. "People see things in mirrors they're not supposed to." A chill crawled over my skin. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He just grabbed his change and walked back into the storm, disappearing into the thick snow. I sat there for a long moment, my fingers numb against the counter. My head told me it was a coincidence. My gut told me otherwise. I turned back to the cameras, watching the screen with a sinking dread. The feed from inside the store looked normal, but the restroom camera? The mirror was fogged up again. And this time, my reflection wasn't alone. There was something behind it. A dark, indistinct shape, standing just out of sight, just over my shoulder. My throat went dry. I slowly turned, expecting to see something, but there was nothing behind me. The gas station was empty. The screen flickered. The image glitched. And for a brief, horrifying second, the reflection turned to face me, while I remained still. The monitor shut off. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. Then, from the restroom, I heard it. A tap. Fingernails, dragging across glass. I ran. I didn't even bother locking up. I just grabbed my jacket and bolted through the storm, my boots crunching against the snow, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. My hands fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them before shoving one into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into drive. But before I could peel away, I made one mistake. I glanced at my rearview mirror, and sitting in my back seat was me, grinning. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked up, my vision blurring with sheer mind-numbing terror. Reflections, Moskran's moved, its lips forming silent words. You shouldn't have looked. But the engine cut out, the lights died, the snow swallowed everything, and the last thing I remember was my own voice whispering in the dark. Your turn. Story number 2. The gas station that only appears in winter. The snowstorm had swallowed the highway whole. It came out of nowhere, thick sheets of white crashing down, turning the road into an endless, featureless stretch of ice. My gas tank was nearly empty. My phone had no signal. And for the last half hour, I hadn't seen a single car. Just snow. And more snow. Then, through the blizzard, I saw it. A gas station. It stood at the edge of the road, its neon open sign flickering against the dark. The pumps were old, the building even older, sitting there like it had been forgotten by time. Relief surged through me as I pulled in, tires skidding slightly on the icy pavement. The place was deserted. No cars, no attendant. But the lights were on and the door was unlocked. I stepped inside, shivering from the cold, my boots squeaking against the cracked tile. Hello? My voice echoed, swallowed by the quiet. The shelves were half stocked with dusty snacks. The air smelled stale, and an old radio on the counter played a song I didn't recognize. The place felt off. I walked toward the counter, glancing at the security monitor behind it. The grainy screen showed the outside, but something was wrong. It wasn't snowing. I turned to the window. The blizzard was still raging outside, but on the monitor, the gas station stood under a clear, starless sky. I stared, my stomach twisting. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe the camera feed was delayed. Maybe it was just broken. Then something moved on the screen. A figure stepping out from behind the pumps, dressed in dark clothing, head tilted as if watching. I spun toward the window, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing, just white, endless snow. The door creaked behind me. I whipped around. A woman stood in the doorway, her long red coat dusted with snow. Her face was pale, almost colorless, her eyes wide and frantic. She looked like she had been running. "You need to leave," she whispered. Her voice was thin, almost swallowed by the howling wind outside. I blinked, caught off guard. What? She stepped closer, her breath coming out in uneven gas. "This place, it's not real." A cold weight settled in my chest. "What do you mean?" She shook her head. "I was driving, got lost in the storm, just like you. I stopped here last year. Same gas station, same storm. I went inside, and..." Her voice broke. "I was trapped." My hands clenched into fists. "That's impossible." She grabbed my arm, her fingers like ice. "Did you see them yet?" A chill crawled up my spine. "See who?" Her eyes flicked to the monitor behind the counter. I turned. The figure was still on the screen. Closer now. My pulse pounded. I looked back at the window. The snow was blinding, but I swore I saw something shift just beyond the pumps. The woman's grip tightened. "They keep you here. Every winter, every storm. They make sure you never leave." I wrenched free. "That's crazy." She didn't argue, just backed away toward the door. "Don't turn your back on them." Then she was gone. The bell above the door jingled softly as the wind slammed it shut. I exhaled, my breath shaky. This was insane. I was exhausted, cold. My mind was playing tricks on me. I needed gas. That was all. Get fuel. Get out. I grabbed a pump handle, my breath coming in short bursts. The numbers on the screen flickered wildly before settling on a total. I hadn't even started fueling. Then, the station lights cut out. I was plunged into darkness. The storm outside raged, the wind screaming through the cracks in the walls. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was dead. Not just no signal, completely off. Footsteps crunched in the snow. Slow, measured, coming from behind the pumps. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath turning shallow. This isn't real. This isn't real. The security monitor flickered back on. I forced myself to look. The feed showed the inside of the store now. The shelves, the counter, the back wall, and then me, standing there in the dark. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. Still, waiting, watching. I spun around, nothing. The lights came back on with a flicker. The radio crackled back to life, playing that same eerie tune. The blizzard outside still roared. I didn't stop to question it. I sprinted to my car, shoving the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, stuttered. The headlights flickered. A shape stood in the middle of the road ahead. Tall, unmoving, featureless. My breath hitched. The car finally roared to life. I slammed my foot down, tires skidding as I sped away. The gas station vanished into the storm behind me. I didn't look back. I drove until the storm began to clear, until the sky turned a dull, overcast gray. My knuckles were white against the wheel, my body trembling. Then, just as I was about to pull over and catch my breath, I saw something in the distance. A gas station. Old, run down. Neon, open, sign, flickering, waiting. Story number 3. The blood-priced gas. The man walked in just as the storm hit its worst. The wind howled outside, snow hammering against the windows like it was trying to get in. The gas station was empty, the roads long abandoned. I had spent most of my shift staring at the security cameras, watching the swirling whiteout blur the world into nothing. But when the bell above the door chimed, I felt a sudden, crawling unease. He was bundled in an old, heavy coat, the kind that looked like it belonged to another century. His boots left thick, wet prints on the tile floor, but there was something strange about them. No trail leading in, just a single row of steps starting from the doorway. He walked straight to the counter, pulling something from his pocket, a small bundle wrapped in dirty cloth. He placed it down carefully, like it was fragile. I tried to get a good look at his face, but the dim station lights cast deep shadows over his features. "A full tank," he said. His voice was dry, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. I hesitated. "Cash or card?" He slid the bundle toward me. "This will do." I frowned. The cloth was stained, dark and old. Something inside shifted slightly, and my stomach clenched. It was too light to be money, too soft to be metal. "I can't take this," I said. He didn't move, didn't blink. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. "Take it," he said again, quieter this time. I swallowed, glancing at the cameras. The outside feed was nothing but a white blur. No cars, no tire tracks, just an endless void of snow. "Sir," I said slowly, forcing myself to keep my voice steady, "if you don't have cash, I can't—" The lights flickered. The old radio behind the counter let out a low burst of static. Then, the song playing warped, like a tape being stretched too far. A deep, distorted voice whispered something unintelligible before cutting out completely. I turned back to the man. He was closer now. I hadn't seen him move, but he was leaning over the counter, that wrapped bundle pressed between us. His breath came in slow, visible puffs in the cold air. "You don't understand," he murmured. "This is the price." I didn't dare touch it. My gut screamed at me to refuse, to send him back into the storm, but something in his voice kept me frozen. A terrible, undeniable weight. "What is it?" I asked. The man tilted his head slightly. "A gift," he said. "An offering." The wind outside picked up, rattling the glass. A deep groaning sound echoed through the pumps, like something heavy shifting. I reached for the bundle. The cloth was damp, sticky. My fingers brushed against something soft and warm. I pulled my hand back instantly, nausea rising in my throat. "What the hell is this?" I snapped. He didn't answer, just pushed it closer. "Take it," he whispered, "or they will take you." The radio crackled. The lights flickered again, longer this time. When they returned, the gas station felt different. The air was heavier, the cold sharper. The silence had a presence, like something unseen was now watching. I looked at the man. His face was clearer now. Wrong. His skin was too smooth, too stretched, like it was barely holding on to the shape of a human. His eyes were too dark, too deep, as if there was no end to them. I grabbed the bundle and shoved it back toward him. "I don't want this." He shook his head. "It doesn't work like that." The security monitor behind him flickered. I glanced at the screen, and I saw myself standing outside. The image was grainy, the snowy haze making it hard to see, but there was no mistaking it. My uniform, my jacket, my face. The me on the screen was staring at the station. At this me. I turned sharply toward the window. Nothing. Just snow. And the empty road. But on the monitor, the other me was still there. Still watching. The man exhaled slowly. "They already know you." The bundle in front of me twitched. I shoved back from the counter, my breath hitching. "What did you bring here?" The man straightened. "Payment," he said simply. I didn't dare unwrap it. I didn't want to know what was inside. The air in the station was suffocating now, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. I looked at the gas pump monitor. Pump 3 had already been authorized. I hadn't touched the register. The man turned toward the door, pulling his coat tighter around himself. "It's done," he murmured. I should have let him leave. I should have let him walk into that storm and disappear. But I couldn't help myself. I checked the monitor again. The other me was gone. And something else had taken its place. A shape. Tall. Blacker than the night. Standing at the edge of the gas station lights. Watching. Waiting. I looked back at the man. "Who are you?" He paused. Smiled. "Someone who made the right choice." And then he was gone. The bell above the door didn't chime, like the snow didn't move. He was just gone. But I couldn't help myself. I checked the monitor again. The other me was gone, and something else had taken its place. A shape, tall, blacker than the night, standing at the edge of the gas station lights, watching, waiting. I looked back at the man. "Who are you?" He paused, smiled. "Someone who made the right choice." And then he was gone. The bell above the door didn't chime. The snow didn't move. He was just gone. I turned back to the counter, staring at the bundle he had left behind. I wanted to throw it out, burn it, pretend none of this happened. But some part of me knew. It wouldn't matter. I grabbed my keys and ran to my car. My hands trembled as I turned the ignition. The gas meter was full. I hadn't filled it. The moment my headlights flicked on, I saw movement. That thing at the edge of the lot. It took a step forward. I slammed my foot on the gas. The gas station vanished behind me. I drove for miles, the snowstorm finally thinning. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't look at the passenger seat. I didn't check my mirrors, not until I saw another station ahead, a different one. Lights bright, neon, open, sign, flickering. I pulled in, my body still shaking. I stepped inside, gasping for breath, desperate to feel normal again. The clerk behind the counter looked up. His face went pale. He stared at me, at the bundle in my hands. And then, in a whisper, he asked the question that made my stomach drop. "Who gave you that?" Story number 4. The hitchhiker that wasn't there. The trucker burst through the door like something was chasing him. Snow clung to his jacket, his boots stomping wet prints across the tile floor. His face was pale, sweat mixing with the ice clinging to his beard. He looked around, eyes darting, breath uneven like he had run a mile in the freezing cold. "You need to tell me," he said, voice raw. "How long have I been here?" I stared at him, my fingers frozen over the register. The gas station was empty, except for the two of us. The storm outside was thick, the wind howling like a living thing. It had been a dead night, until now. I hesitated. "Sir, this is the first time I've seen you." His face tightened. His eyes flicked to the security camera screen behind me. "No, that's not possible. I just stopped here. I picked someone up, a hitchhiker." His voice shook. "I talked to him. I remember talking to him." I glanced at the snow-covered parking lot. His truck was there, the engine still running, headlights cutting through the storm, but there was no one else. "You're alone," I said. The trucker swallowed hard, his hands curled into fists. "Remember he was right there? He got in my truck?" I heard his voice. He was sitting next to me. I didn't know what to say. He ran a hand down his face. I asked him where he was headed. He told me, not far. I made a joke about him being vague, and he just smiled. He looked down at his hands. Then I glanced at the road for 1 second. And when I looked back, his breathing turned ragged. He was gone. The gas station felt colder. The heater buzzed above me, but the air felt wrong. thick with something unseen. I tried to keep my voice steady. Maybe he got out at a stoplight. Maybe... No, the trucker snapped. I was doing 60. The door never opened. The seatbelt was still fastened. He clenched his jaw. And the seat was warm. A shiver crawled up my spine. The trucker turned toward the window, staring at his rig through the snow. I swear, I heard him breathing. He rubbed his arms like he was trying to shake something off. I felt him sitting there. I felt the weight shift when he moved. I checked the cameras again. There was nothing outside, but snow and darkness. Then the lights flickered. The old radio behind the counter let out a low hum of static. The trucker tensed. I grabbed the remote and twisted the volume down, but the static only got louder. It rose in pitch, warping into something almost like a voice, a whisper. I turned it off completely. The silence after was deafening. The trucker ran a hand through his damp hair. I can't go back in there. I licked my lips, throat dry. You need a tow? I can call someone. His eyes stayed locked on his truck. Number I need to know if I'm going insane. Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. Then he turned to me. You have cameras, right? Show me the feed. I hesitated. I didn't want to look, but something in his expression told me he wouldn't leave until I did. I swallowed hard and rewound the footage. The screen flickered as I scrubbed through the last 20 minutes. I found his truck pulling into the lot, headlights cutting through the storm. The door swung open. He stepped out, alone. There was no hitchhiker. I turned to him slowly. His face was pale. That's not possible, he whispered. He grabbed the screen as if shaking it would change what we were seeing. His knuckles went white. I saw him, he said. The screen glitched. For a split second, the image warped, a blur of static, and then a shape, a dark figure, sitting in the passenger seat of his truck, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Then the screen cut to black. The power in the station died. The heater shut off. The lights blinked out. The silence was suffocating, thick and unnatural. The trucker's breathing turned sharp, panicked. I felt a cold sweat drip down my back. The only light came from outside. The snowstorm had calmed slightly, leaving behind a quiet, suffocating stillness. The wind had stopped howling. The world was too quiet. The trucker took a shaky step toward the door. I need to go. My gut screamed at me not to let him, but I didn't know what else to do. He pushed outside, stepping into the knee-deep snow. His boots crunched as he approached his truck, his breath fogging in the air. Then he stopped. His shoulders stiffened. From inside the gas station, I could only see the outline of his truck. The door was still open. The cab, dark, but I felt it. Something was in there, sitting in the passenger seat, waiting. The trucker took a step back, then another. His head shook slightly. No, he whispered. Then the passenger door slowly swung shut. The locks clicked. The engine revved, but his keys were still in his hand. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the tile. The trucker turned toward me, his face drained of all color. Then, the headlights snapped on. The truck lurched forward. It sped out of the lot, tires skidding on the icy road, barreling straight into the storm. I ran to the window, my breath fogging up the glass. The taillights disappeared into the swirling white, swallowed by the night. The trucker was still standing outside. The road was empty. No tracks, no sound, no truck. Just him. His hands trembled as he lifted them, staring at his empty palms. Like he couldn't understand why the keys were still there, like he didn't understand how he had gotten out. Then he turned to me and whispered, "It took my truck." The lights flickered back on, the heater groaned to life, the radio crackled, then settled into quiet static. The trucker stood there for a long time, his breath coming out in short, ragged bursts. I wanted to tell him to come inside, to call someone, but I couldn't force the words out, because when he finally stepped forward, past the gas pumps, past the wet boot prints he had left behind, his footsteps didn't leave a single mark in the snow. Story number 5. The radio knows my name. The snowstorm had turned the highway into an endless stretch of white. It had been hours since a car pulled in, and I was beginning to wonder if I was the last person left on Earth. The gas station was silent, except for the dull hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional static from the old radio behind the counter. It had been playing the same scratchy country station all night, barely cutting through the howling wind outside. I was counting the minutes until my shift ended when the door chimed. A man stepped inside, his boots heavy with snow. His coat was zipped up to his chin, his hat pulled low over his face. Something about him made my skin prickle. He didn't look at me. Didn't even acknowledge I was there. He just walked past the counter and started browsing the shelves. I forced myself to breathe. "Let me know if you need anything," I called. He didn't answer. The radio crackled. I glanced at it. The station had been fuzzy all night, but now the static was louder, like someone was shifting through the frequencies. A burst of a voice, a whisper of a song. Then, silence. And then, clear as day, a voice spoke through the static. "Hello, Ryan." My blood turned to ice. That was my name. I whipped around. The man was still browsing the shelves, his back to me. He hadn't reacted, hadn't moved. The radio crackled again. "Ryan, are you there?" I swallowed hard. The air in the station felt different, heavier. I reached for the dial, twisting it, trying to change the station. The static only deepened. The voice returned. "Ryan, why did you leave the door open?" My stomach dropped. The front door was closed, locked. I turned, scanning the station, heart hammering against my ribs. The man at the shelves had finally moved. He was standing completely still, back straight, hands at his sides. Then slowly he turned his head, but not toward me, toward the radio. The static deepened, and something beneath it, something wrong, murmured just beneath the sound. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt them curling around my spine like cold fingers. The man exhaled, a long, slow breath. "You should answer it." I stared at him. "What?" The radio buzzed louder. The lights flickered. Then, "Ryan, come outside." I took a step back. My hands were shaking. "Who the hell is this?" The man at the shelves turned fully now. His eyes were dark, too dark, and when he spoke again, his voice was wrong. "Ryan," he said, lips curling into something almost like a smile. "They know your name now." The power cut out. For a single moment, the gas station was plunged into complete darkness. The storm outside raged, the wind hammering against the windows. The radio continued crackling, even though everything else had shut down. And then, footsteps, not inside, outside, slow, crunching through the thick snow, moving toward the door. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the station in a dim, sickly glow. The man was still standing there, perfectly still, watching me. Then the door handle turned. I backed up, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. No one should be out there. I whispered. The man smiled wider. You still think you're alone? The radio hissed. The door handle rattled harder, like someone was testing the lock. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a metal flashlight from under the counter. My knuckles turned white around it. The footsteps stopped. For a long, stretched moment, nothing happened. The storm outside swallowed every sound. Then, the radio clicked again. Ryan, come see what we look like. The lights burst back on. I flinched at the brightness. My vision swam. And when I looked at the man, he was gone. The store was empty. No footprints in the snow leading outside. No sign he had ever been there. I swallowed, pulse hammering in my throat. Then, the radio crackled one last time, and I heard my own voice. Ryan, look behind you. I did. And for the first time all night, the front door was wide open. Story number 6. The man who left footprints but never moved. The snow was untouched when I started my shift. The storm had been relentless all night, burying the highway in thick drifts of white. No cars had come through in hours. No footprints marked the fresh snow outside, just the flickering neon glow of the gas station sign reflecting off the icy ground. It was the kind of night that made you feel alone, like the rest of the world had disappeared. I was behind the counter, staring at the security monitors, half listening to the hum of the radio when I noticed it. Footprints. They stretched from the edge of the lot, deep impressions in the snow, leading straight to the front door. But something about them made my stomach tighten. There was only one set. Whoever had walked up to the store hadn't walked away. I glanced at the lot. The wind howled, whipping snow across the pavement, but there was no one there. I waited, heart thudding. Maybe someone was just standing out of view. Maybe they had walked inside without me noticing. But the gas station was empty. The silence pressed against my ears. I stepped out from behind the counter, approached the door. The glass was fogged from the heater inside, but through the haze, I saw them clearly. Those deep footprints leading right up to the threshold. My breath caught. There were no footprints leading away. I reached for the door handle, half expecting it to be cold from the storm, but it was warm. The radio crackled behind me. I turned sharply, pulse pounding. The station was empty, aisles stocked with the same dusty snacks, the soda fridge humming in the corner. But the air had changed. It was heavier now, like something unseen had filled the space. I exhaled and reached for the security camera feed. I rewound the footage, watching the outside view. The snow was undisturbed, the wind howling in bursts. And then the footprints just appeared. No person, no movement. 1 second, the snow was untouched. The next, the footprints were there. My hands went cold. The lights flickered. A knock sounded from the front door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My breath turned sharp as I spun toward the glass. Nothing. Then another knock, louder this time. I swallowed hard, throat dry. The footprints were still there, leading up to the door, but no one was standing outside. The glass rattled slightly from the wind, and then, through the fogged glass, I saw it. A shadow. Not a person. A shape. It stood just outside the reach of the neon lights, its outline distorted, shifting as if it wasn't fully there. My lungs locked up. It wasn't moving, but I felt it watching. The door handle twitched. I stumbled back, my hands scrambling for the counter. The air turned icy, breath fogging in front of me. Then, slowly, the shadow stepped forward. The lights inside flickered again, casting long, stretching shapes across the walls. The figure was clearer now, tall, unnatural, its edges blurring in and out of focus like something that didn't belong in this world. The security monitor glitched. And then, the worst part, the figure smiled, not with a mouth, not with a face, but I felt it. The door swung open. The wind blasted inside, knocking over a display of snack bags, scattering them across the floor. The door chime rang uselessly over the roaring storm. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then, the footprints started moving. Not a person, just the prints, sinking into the snow, one after the other, stepping inside, into the gas station. I sucked in a sharp breath, stepping back, my heel catching on the mat. The footprints stopped just past the threshold. Then started toward me. I turned and bolted behind the counter, my hands shaking as I reached for the emergency lock button under the register. The door slammed shut. The wind outside howled even louder, rattling the windows. But the footprints did not fade. They just stood there, waiting. The radio crackled again. A voice, faint at first, buried beneath the static, then clearer. "You see me now." My stomach dropped. I reached for my phone. No signal. The security monitor flickered. The camera feed. I saw myself, standing behind the counter, wide-eyed, terrified, and behind me, more footprints, appearing one by one, stepping closer, inside the gas station. Right behind me, the register slammed shut on its own. The lights buzzed, flickering wildly. The air was thick with something unseen, something watching, waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut. "This isn't real," I whispered. The voice on the radio chuckled. "You let me in." I gasped, whipping around. Nothing. The footprints were gone. The gas station was silent again, save for the soft hum of the radio. The heater clicked, blowing warm air into the empty store. I exhaled, my breath shaking. My eyes flicked to the door. The snow outside was undisturbed again. No footprints, no shadow. I forced myself to step out from behind the counter, my legs unsteady. I reached for the door, pressing my palm against the glass. The warmth was gone. It was ice cold again. I let out a breath. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the isolation, the storm, the exhaustion had messed with my head. I turned away, and that was my mistake. The radio crackled one last time. "You shouldn't have turned your back." The door chime rang, and behind me, the footprints appeared again. Story number 7. The gas that vanished. The man came in shaking. His coat was soaked, his beard covered in frost, and his hands trembled as he placed them on the counter. The snowstorm outside had swallowed the highway whole, making it impossible to see more than a few feet past the gas station windows. I had been alone all night, watching the whiteout consume everything. But now, this man was here, and something was very wrong. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice hoarse. I glanced at the security monitor, then back at him. His pupils were blown wide, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Yeah," I said cautiously. He exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. "I stopped here an hour ago. Filled up my tank. Do you remember me?" I frowned. I had been at the counter all night. No one had come in. "I don't think so," I said. His hands curled into fists. "I was just here," he insisted. "I pulled up to pump 2, filled my tank, went inside, paid," he swallowed, "and then I left." I looked at the security monitor again. I rewound the footage for the last hour. The snow was thick, the pumps barely visible, but there was no car. No one had been here. I turned the screen so he could see. You never pulled in. His breathing hitched. He backed away from the counter, shaking his head. No, no, I was here, he muttered. I was here. The storm rattled the windows. The man ran a hand over his face, pacing in front of the counter. I left, got back on the highway. I drove for at least half an hour before I realized. He hesitated. My gas tank was empty. A chill crept up my spine. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe you had a leak? He met my eyes. It wasn't a leak. His voice was quieter now. The gauge was full when I left, and then all at once it was empty. I stared at him. That's not possible. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. I thought the same thing. So I pulled over, got out, checked the tank myself. He swallowed hard. It was dry, bone dry, like I had never filled it at all. The heater kicked on, filling the silence with a dull hum. My hands felt cold against the counter. The man dragged his fingers through his damp hair, looking toward the door. Snow piled up outside, nearly reaching the bottom of the glass. When I checked my phone, he continued. The GPS said I had only driven 1 mile. I didn't say anything. Then, he went on, voice barely above a whisper. I saw it. My throat tightened. Saw what? His eyes flicked toward the security monitor. The gas station. My stomach twisted. I was right back here, he said. Like I had never left. He exhaled shakily. But I never turned around. I never made a U-turn. The register creaked under my grip. I thought I was losing my mind, he said. But I figured maybe I just spaced out. Maybe I just got turned around in the storm. So I pulled in again. He gave a bitter smile. I filled my tank again. Went inside again. Paid again. He inhaled sharply. And when I left that time, he licked his lips. It happened again. I shook my head. That doesn't make sense. His face darkened. I did this 4 times. My blood ran cold. Every single time, he said, voice low. I drove away, and the moment I looked at my gas gauge, it was empty. Every single time, I ended up right back here. The wind howled against the glass. I checked the security monitor again. The snow made it hard to see, but I swore I noticed something. A faint shape just beyond the gas pumps. I leaned in, squinting. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I checked the front window. The snow swirled violently under the station lights, but I saw nothing outside. When I turned back to the screen, the figure was closer. I took a step back. The man was watching me now, his expression tight. You see it too, don't you? I swallowed. I don't know what you're talking about. He let out a slow breath, then turned toward the door. I need to try again. I stared at him. What? His hand hovered over the handle. I need to leave. Maybe if I... The power cut out. Darkness swallowed the store. The storm outside roared. The only sound inside was our breathing. My chest was tight, my ears ringing. The security monitor flickered, briefly flashing back to life. The figure was now standing at the front door. I couldn't see its face. I didn't want to. The man sucked in a sharp breath. The door handle turned. I grabbed his wrist, yanking him back. Don't. He looked at me, confused. The handle rattled harder. I shook my head. You never opened the door before, right? He hesitated. No. The realization hit me like ice water. 4 times. He had left 4 times. And every time, he had been brought back. But what if the reason he had been brought back was because he never let it in? The door handle stopped moving. The security monitor flickered again. The figure was gone. The power buzzed back on, the lights flashing overhead. The heater groaned. The radio crackled. and the gas station was empty again. The man's breath came out in heavy bursts. His hands were shaking. I reached for my phone. "I think we need help." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Who the hell do we call?" I had no answer. The snow outside thickened, covering the footprints he had left when he walked in, covering the tire tracks that had led him here. And I realized with a slow, growing dread, there were no new footprints at the door, like no one had entered at all. Story number 8. The customer who died yesterday. I recognized him the second he walked in. The bell above the gas station door jingled softly as he stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. He gave me a nod, just like he always did, before heading toward the back of the store where we kept the coffee. It was routine. Every night just past midnight, he'd come in, buy the same things, a large black coffee and a pack of smokes, before heading back out into the snow-covered night. But tonight was different because he had died yesterday. I felt my stomach twist as I watched him move around the store, like nothing had changed. My fingers hovered over the register, my heart pounding. This had to be a mistake. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe I was remembering wrong. But no, I was sure. I had seen the newspaper headline that morning. Local man killed in car accident during blizzard. His name had been in bold print beneath it. Earl Matson? I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Hey, Earl." He looked up, smiling like he always did. "How's it going, kid?" I could barely breathe. He looked exactly the same. Same heavy boots tracking in slush, same worn-out winter coat, same tired but kind expression, like he hadn't been crushed beneath the weight of an overturned truck less than 24 hours ago. I forced a smile. "Cold night," he chuckled. "Ain't it always?" My fingers gripped the edge of the counter. The heater rattled above us, but the store suddenly felt too cold. Earl grabbed his usual coffee, then made his way to the counter. He set down a pack of cigarettes and pulled a crumpled $5 bill from his pocket. My stomach dropped. I had read the article twice. His body had been found in his truck, which had caught fire after skidding off the road. That $5 bill should have burned with him. I hesitated before reaching for it, my hand brushing against his. His skin was ice cold. I flinched, nearly dropping the bill. "You all right?" he asked, his head tilting slightly. I forced a nod, avoiding his eyes. "Yeah, just tired." I rang up the total, my hands trembling slightly. When I looked up again, he was staring at me. Not in a way that was unnatural, but in a way that suddenly felt wrong, like he was waiting for me to say something else. The security camera flickered. I glanced at the screen behind the counter. Earl stood in front of me, coffee in hand, but on the monitor, the store was empty. I sucked in a breath. The camera showed me alone at the register. The aisles behind me, dark and still. There was no Earl, no one. I turned back to him. His face was blank now, unreadable. "You okay, kid?" His voice was the same as always, but my gut screamed at me to get away. I forced a laugh, pushing his change across the counter. "Yeah, just thought I saw something on the monitor." His eyes didn't leave mine. The moment stretched too long. Then he smiled. "Well, I'll see you tomorrow." I didn't respond. He grabbed his coffee and walked to the door. The bell jingled again, the cold air rushing in as he stepped outside. I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking. I turned back to the security monitor. The door had never opened. The parking lot outside was untouched. No footprints, no tire tracks, like he had never been here at all. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I turned to the window, my breath fogging up the glass. I couldn't see him anymore. Just the swirling white of the storm. The heater buzzed loudly. The radio crackled, then cut to silence. I swallowed hard, willing myself to stay calm. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I heard it. A knock, not at the front door, from the back storage room. I turned, slowly. The store was empty. Nothing out of place. Another knock, louder this time. I took a shaky step toward the door, my fingers hovering over the handle. The security monitor flickered again. And in the storage room feed, Earl was standing inside. His back was to the camera, shoulders stiff. He wasn't moving. The knock came again. I hadn't let him in. The lights overhead flickered wildly. The radio cut back in. A burst of static followed by a low, garbled voice. I couldn't understand the words, but my body felt them, deep in my bones. I backed away from the door. "This isn't real," I whispered. The security monitor glitched. The screen flashed to static, then cleared again. The storage room was empty. I turned toward the door, and it was open, just a crack. Cold air leaked out, curling along the floor like fog. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached out, hesitated. Then, slowly, I pushed the door open, wider. The storage room lights were off, but through the dim glow of the emergency exit sign, I saw something. A coffee cup, sitting in the middle of the floor, steam still rising from it. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut. My breath came out in ragged gasps. I didn't care what was happening anymore. I just wanted to leave. I grabbed my keys, yanked on my coat, and bolted for the exit. The moment my foot hit the icy pavement outside, I felt it. The shift, the silence. The gas station behind me went dark. The neon open sign blinked out. The parking lot, the pumps, everything vanished into the storm, swallowed whole by the swirling white. And standing at the edge of the road was Earl, his back to me, his coffee cup gone. He turned his head slightly, just enough that I could see half of his face, but there was nothing left of it. Just burned, blackened flesh. His lips curled into a smile. "See you tomorrow, kid." And then the storm took him. I never worked another night shift again. Story number 9. The smiling woman at the pumps. The first time I saw her, I thought she was just another late-night traveler, stuck in the storm like the rest of us. She stood at pump 6, wearing a long red coat, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The gas station was dead empty, the roads buried under thick snow, but she didn't seem bothered by the cold. Her head was slightly tilted, her dark hair falling over one shoulder, and she was smiling, not at anything, not at anyone. Just smiling. I tried not to stare as I went back to counting the till, but after a few minutes I glanced up again. She was still there, unmoving. The wind howled, rattling the windows, but she didn't even flinch. I checked the security monitor. The grainy screen showed the empty road, the deserted lot, the snow swirling under the fluorescent lights, and her, standing perfectly still at the pump. My stomach twisted. I had seen a lot of weird people working night shifts, but this was different. She wasn't pumping gas. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't looking around like she was waiting for someone. She was just standing there and smiling. I grabbed the store phone, debating whether to call the police. But what would I even say? There's a woman outside, and she's Weird? They'd laugh me off the line. I set the phone down and watched the monitor instead. 10 minutes passed, then 20. She never moved. The heater clicked on behind me, making me jump. My breath fogged in the stale air. The gas station suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I forced myself to look out the window again. She was closer. Not much. Just a step forward. But I hadn't seen her move. A sharp chill ran through me. I checked the monitor, rewound the footage. But the video skipped. A brief moment of static. And then she was just there. I turned back to the window, pulse hammering in my ears. My gut screamed at me to lock the doors, but my hands wouldn't move. Then for the first time, she lifted her hand and waved at me. A slow, deliberate motion. That smile still stretched across her face. I bolted for the back room. My hands shook as I dug out the emergency lock switch, slamming it down. The electronic deadbolts engaged with a loud thunk. My breath came in short gasps. When I looked back at the monitor, she was gone. My stomach twisted. I checked the lot, the road, the pumps. Empty. The snow-covered ground was untouched. No footprints. A sharp knock hit the glass behind me. I spun so fast, I nearly fell. She was right at the front door. The only thing between us was a thin pane of glass. Up close, she was worse. Her face was too smooth, like porcelain. Her lips stretched impossibly wide. Her eyes, black, bottomless pits, locked onto mine. She pressed her palm to the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. Then she spoke, but I didn't hear her through the glass. Her voice came through the radio behind me. "Let me in." I choked back a scream. The radio crackled, shifting frequencies, but her voice stayed clear, too clear, like she was standing right next to me. I backed away. "Go away," I whispered. The smile never wavered. "Let me in, Ryan." The sound of my name broke me. I turned, bolting toward the storage room. My hands fumbled with the latch as I yanked the door open and slammed it shut behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps. The radio still whispered, "Ryan, open the door." I covered my ears, then silence. I waited. Minutes passed, maybe more. I slowly turned the handle and peeked into the store. Empty. The door was still locked. The gas station was silent. I crept toward the counter, checking the monitor. The pumps were empty. The lot was still. I exhaled a shaky breath. Maybe it was over. Then the screen glitched. The footage rewound itself. Fast. The woman at the pumps appeared again, standing, waiting, smiling. But this time I watched closely. The static hit, and in one frame she was gone. And in the next frame, she was inside, standing behind the counter. Right where I was sitting now. The monitor shut off, and behind me, the radio whispered, "Got you." Story number 10. The Frostbitten Stranger. The man stumbled in just after midnight, his body barely holding itself together. The storm outside was relentless, burying the highway in thick waves of snow, the wind howling through the empty lot like something alive. I hadn't seen a car in hours, hadn't heard anything but the steady hum of the gas station lights. But then the door chimed, and he appeared. His coat was stiff with ice, his face pale beneath the frost clinging to his beard. He was shaking, not just from the cold, but something deeper, something unnatural. His lips were blue, his fingers curled inward like his body was forgetting how to move. I jumped from behind the counter. "Jesus, man, are you okay?" He swayed on his feet. For a second, I thought he was about to collapse, but then his head snapped up, his eyes locking onto mine. They were black, not dark, not shadowed, pure, endless black. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay put. "I need help," he rasped. His breath fogged in the warm air, his voice barely audible over the wind outside. I hesitated, then grabbed a bottled water from the fridge and shoved it toward him. "Here, sit down, man. I'll call someone." His frozen fingers wrapped around the bottle, but he didn't drink, just held it, staring at me like he was trying to remember something. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "It's still out there." The hairs on my arms rose. "What is?" His breathing quickened. He turned toward the window, his hands gripping the counter. "It followed me," he said. "I don't know how, but it did." The wind outside screamed. The glass rattled. I took a slow step back, glancing at the security monitors. The snow made it impossible to see anything past the gas pumps. No cars, no movement, just an endless white void. "What followed you?" I asked again, forcing my voice to stay calm. His fingers dug into the counter. His nails were cracked, his skin raw from the cold. "I was driving," he said. "The storm came out of nowhere. I pulled over when I saw someone on the side of the road." My stomach twisted. "It was just standing there," he whispered, "in the middle of the snow. No coat, no shoes, just standing." The heater groaned behind me. The lights buzzed. I felt the walls close in. "I slowed down," he continued. "I rolled the window down, asked if they needed help." His breath hitched. Then they smiled. Something in his voice made my blood turn to ice. "And then they ran at my car." My pulse pounded. "Ran?" He nodded, his jaw clenched. "Not through the snow. Over it. Like they weren't even touching the ground." The wind outside slammed against the glass. "I hit the gas," he said. "Didn't look back. Just kept driving. But then my headlights flickered. My radio cut out." His breath came in short bursts. "And when I checked my rear view mirror, I didn't want to know. They were in my back seat." A sick feeling settled in my gut. I swerved, nearly crashed. When I looked again, they were gone. I swallowed hard. "But you made it here." He nodded. "Yeah, but..." He glanced back at the window, his frozen breath curling in the air. "It followed me." "I know it did." I turned toward the door, my pulse hammering. The parking lot was still empty, the snow untouched, and yet something felt wrong. The wind had stopped howling. The world outside had gone still, like something was waiting. The man's hands clenched into fists. "Don't go outside," he whispered. I barely heard him over the sudden knock at the door. I jumped. My body went rigid. It was soft, barely audible over the silence. A slow, deliberate knock. I turned toward the glass. My breath caught. There was a shape, a dark figure standing just beyond the reach of the gas station lights, not moving, not shivering from the cold, just standing, watching. The man whimpered, his fingers dug into his arms, his body trembling harder than before. "It found me," he whispered. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The figure at the edge of the lot tilted its head. The security monitor flickered. The cameras glitched. The screen flashed to static, then cut back in. The figure was closer, not by much. Just a step, but I hadn't seen it move. I turned to the man. His face had gone gray, his lips barely moving. "It's coming." The lights flickered. Another knock, louder. I forced myself to step forward. My hands shook as I reached for the lock button under the counter. The man grabbed my wrist. His grip was ice cold. "Don't let it in." The security monitor glitched again. The figure was gone. The lights snapped back to full power. The heater kicked on. The radio crackled, then settled into quiet static. The gas station was silent. I turned back to the man. He was staring at the door, his body stiff. His eyes were black again. A deep, crushing dread settled in my chest. Something was wrong. I stepped away from him, my heart slamming against my ribs. Who are you? His lips curled into something almost like a smile. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out into the snow. I ran to the door, fumbling with the lock. Wait! But the moment he stepped outside, he disappeared. Vanished into the storm, leaving nothing behind. No footprints. No sign he had ever been there at all. I stood there, frozen, my breath fogging up the glass. The parking lot was empty again. The gas station lights flickered once, and then, from the radio, a voice whispered, "Now, it's your turn." Story number 11. The Hands Under the Car. The woman's scream tore through the gas station like a gunshot. I had been restocking the shelves, half listening to the radio crackle through the storm outside, when it happened. A sharp, blood-curdling scream, followed by the frantic sound of boots scraping against ice. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran to the front window just in time to see her stumble backward from her car, her breath fogging in the freezing air. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. I rushed outside, the cold biting into my skin. "Are you okay?" She turned to me, her eyes wide with terror. She was pointing at the ground. There's something under my car." My stomach twisted. I glanced down at the snow-covered pavement beneath her car. Nothing. Just the soft glow of the gas station lights reflecting off the icy ground. I took a cautious step forward. "I don't see anything." She shook her head violently. No, I... Her voice broke. I felt it. A gust of wind howled through the lot, sending a fresh wave of snow swirling around us. I turned back toward the gas station, eyes flicking toward the security cameras. The lot had been empty all night. She was the first customer I had seen in hours. She swallowed hard, gripping her coat tighter around herself. I was filling up my tank, and then She stopped, shuddering. I felt something grab my ankle. A sharp chill crawled up my spine. I crouched down, bracing myself against the freezing ground. The space beneath her car was dark, the shadows stretching deep, making it impossible to see anything clearly. I pulled my phone from my pocket and flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. At first there was nothing, just slush-covered pavement and the underside of the car. But as I moved the light, I saw it, a hand, pale, unmoving, fingers curled slightly as if frozen in the act of reaching. I sucked in a sharp breath and jerked backwards so fast I nearly lost my footing. The woman let out a choked sob, covering her mouth. I turned my phone's flashlight back toward the ground. The light trembled in my shaking grip. The hand was gone. The space under the car was empty. I swallowed hard. My skin crawled with an unnatural, suffocating dread. "I swear to God," I whispered, mostly to myself. I just saw the security monitor inside flickered. I turned sharply toward the gas station window. The screen behind the counter was glitching, static washing over the feed. Then, for a brief moment, the footage cleared, and I saw them. Hands. Too many hands. Pale, thin fingers sliding out from beneath every car in the lot, clawing at the snow, grasping at nothing. Then, the screen cut to black. I grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her toward the gas station. "We need to get inside. Now." She didn't argue. We sprinted across the lot, boots crunching against the ice. My breath was a sharp, panicked rhythm in my ears. The moment we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us. The heater buzzed overhead, but the store felt colder than before. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor. I moved toward the counter, my fingers numb, as I fumbled with the security feed. The footage was still black. I turned to the woman. She was shaking, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "You felt it grab you?" I asked. She nodded, her breathing uneven. It wasn't human. A fresh wave of fear rolled through me. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard, looking toward the window. The snow outside had started falling slower now, revealing the gas pumps, the empty road beyond, but something felt off. She licked her lips. The fingers were too long. A sharp sound echoed through the store. A soft, deliberate tap against the glass. We both froze. Slowly, I turned toward the window. The parking lot was empty. The cars sat still, untouched. The snow was smooth, undisturbed. But the reflection in the glass wasn't ours. In the dim glow of the gas station lights, the glass reflected figures standing just behind us. Not people. Shapes. Long-limbed, bent at unnatural angles. Watching. Waiting. My chest tightened. My hand inched toward the lock button under the counter. The woman let out a sharp breath. "Don't move." The figures in the glass twitched. Then, in perfect unison, they dropped to the floor and crawled toward us. I slammed the lock button. The store lights burst with a loud pop, plunging us into near darkness. The only light now came from my phone, casting long, trembling shadows against the shelves. The woman grabbed my arm. "We can't stay here." I checked the security monitor again. The footage was back, but it wasn't live. It was a loop, the same 5 seconds, over and over. An empty parking lot, a silent gas station, no people, no movement. But at the edge of the screen, just barely visible, a hand was reaching out. From inside the store, I turned just as the back storage door creaked open. A slow, deliberate sound. The woman gasped. I grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the front exit. My fingers fumbled with the keys, shaking too hard to grip them properly. A voice whispered through the radio. "We found you." The emergency lights flickered back on. The store was empty again. The figures in the glass were gone. The parking lot was untouched. No handprints, no trails in the snow. The heater buzzed, blowing warm air against my skin. It felt normal again. Too normal. The woman looked at me, her breath still uneven. "What the hell was that?" I didn't have an answer. I turned back to the security monitor. The footage was back to real time now. No loop. But something was wrong. Every car in the lot had a set of fresh, wet handprints on the windows. One for each car, one for each of us. And in the final frame before the screen glitched again, a hand was reaching out from under the counter. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. But tell me, have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? A shadow where there shouldn't be one? A voice whispering your name when you were alone? Share your horror stories in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the other terrifying stories appearing on your screen right now. You never know what might be lurking in the next one.